But Laura, as a professor at Wharton, can you give us some insight into the student perspective in terms of what they look for when partnering or having relationships with industry partners like their companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of what they're looking for, I mean, they're looking for a lot of the same things. They're looking for opportunities that they can grow in, similar values. One thing that I always tell a lot of my students is to not fall in love too much with the vision, to focus more on the culture, but even more so, focus on what's the particular problem that the organization is having. What is it that that organization needs you to be solving for them? Because otherwise, a lot of times people go into organizations and they flounder a little bit because they've fallen in love with the vision, the overall high-level vision. But on the day-to-day or on the more minutia, the sorts of things that they're going to be doing, they get very much lost. And so also being very cognizant of what is it that they are uniquely situated to do within these organizations. What is it that the organization is currently struggling with? What is it that the organization is going to be grappling with in 1 year or 2 years or 3 years? And thinking about how you may fit at the present day, but also going forward, so that not only do you buy into that vision and that culture, but also you've got something very tangible and discrete that you're a part of.
Absolutely, and I think that tech companies in general, in venture capital is pretty exclusive, and this is about access and inclusion. So in terms of, that's something that's
earlier was what's the success rate for venture for America companies? Our success rate is much higher than normal because everyone who starts a company out of Venture for America has access to this talent pipeline of some of the top young people in the country. So if you imagine how many of you all are startup operators out there? Imagine if you got your pick of the top prospects in the country year after year, like what that would do to your success rate. So that's a lot of it. And again, we take pride in being able to, because 57% of college graduates today are women, as an example. So if it's like the majority of the talent, clearly. So if you can access that and break down the natural barriers, it's a huge competitive advantage.
What do you think about from your research in terms of recruitment?
I think you touched upon a couple of interesting things from your question. I mean, the first is I don't think it's isolated to just tech. Right, I think this tech tends to get a lot of attention, but we're seeing this in a variety of different industries. We're seeing this throughout. I think we naturally go to the networks that we have and the people we know, which is a great thing because we do know them, we feel comfortable with them, and there is this sort of embeddedness that helps with the successfulness. But that can be a double-edged sword. It can also be dangerous because the people that are typically in our networks are also those who look like us, think like us, behave like us. We are creatures that are drawn by homophily. We go to those that are familiar and have familiar thought patterns to us. And so when we start our organizations and we have people that think like us, not only does it allow us, not give us that diversity of thought, but we then continue to bring in more people who look like that because that's who their networks are. And so I think there needs to be this balance between having and drawing from these people that we trust and are from our networks, but also expanding so that we think about it. Now, there's a lot that we're hearing about, let's just make sure that we're being more inclusive and, I study diversity and I'm even getting sick of hearing about diversity, but so it's not just diversity for diversity's sake. It's really about thinking, when you are an entrepreneur or you are an investor, for example, so some of the investments that I do on my own, totally outside of my day job, I have a rule of 3 where I make sure that I'm meeting whoever I'm investing in 3 different times in 3 different circumstances. So one may be a one-to-one meeting in my office, another one might be over breakfast, and another might be in a social setting. And by seeing that same person 3 different times in 3 different situations, you're getting those different personas that I talked about before. And that helps to break down some of that natural homophily that we might be projecting based on just a one-on-one meeting.
Just everything getting wiped by robots and letting them make the decisions and recruitment decisions as well.
I think it's great in practice, but I don't think it's realistically something that I would do even, or I think lots of other people do, because there's just different pieces of information that we need to rely on. one piece of information is sort of you throw all of this data into an algorithm and it spits you out the correct answer. But that's really not the investment, that's not the investing game, right? Because then everybody's portfolio would look very, very similar. There would be no sort of arbitrage opportunities. We wouldn't be able to identify those home runs or there's just lots of sort of nuance that goes into these decisions.
I love the algorithm because
I hate the algorithm.
Because we've been, like, these are my friends on Sand Hill Road hanging out, and like most of them, if they're honest and have a few drinks, they're like, look, it's not like we're like super brilliant. It's that like 10 years ago, one of our partners invested in like Airbnb, or one of our companies said like, and that defines a good firm. Like, and then when you put them on stage and that you ask them why they did it, then they'll come up with a rationale retroactively. Like, you know, it's like.
Right.
So to your point about the fact that, you know, 42% women, the algorithm says, and then in real life it's 2%, how do you remedy that? Like saying, hey, change the culture will not remedy that. If you just put the algorithm in charge, apparently it would remedy that. And it makes me super pumped to hear. It also exposes a lot of the nonsense that's out there, which is that, you know, everyone retroactively explains their success.
That's true.
You know, it's so I love it. I mean, and this is coming from someone who's very scared of automation generally. Like automation, I mean, not scared of it, like I love automation too. What I don't love is that our institutions and most humans are not really going to be in a position to benefit from it or adapt to it positively. Many of them will lose their jobs. People tend to take that very poorly. So that's a set of problems, set of very, very large problems that are coming down the pike. But trying to make clubby human beings, you know, like sort of different humans strikes me as impossible. And having an algorithm to be like a sounding board or like a sanity check or whatnot, or a rival. Because imagine a world where the algorithm just out-invests people. My gosh, and that, like, wouldn't that, I mean, that'd be such a mind blower. So I'm very, like, you know, anyway, automation's coming, it's gonna be big, and that's one of the few instances where I actually love it.
So I would just counter that these algorithms are still created by people. And so I worry that algorithm looks great, 42% women, but these algorithms are still being created by worlds in which we have 93% venture capitalists that are men, and their thoughts, their behaviors, their, you know, including the 7% women that are VC, but these algorithms are still being created in a world where we have these criteria, we have these inputs, and so by blindly following an algorithm just worries me, where we don't have that nuance that different perspectives can put into those sorts of things.
Sorry, the really frightening thing is that a lot of companies are using AI now as an employer screen. Like, that's frightening, because then you're gonna have people that are unemployable across the board, you know, because it's not like if you impress the person, like none of that will exist anymore. It's just the AI didn't like you, which means the other AI is also not gonna like you.
And Andrew and Laura, this question is more for you guys, but right now, if I'm an early stage founder or, you know, looking to raise money, I have a lot of options, right? I can go to a traditional VC firm, I can crowdfund, I can go the initial coin offering route, which I'm personally fascinated by, but how do you guys position people, and how do I know, like, what route is best for me?
So, in my experience, the first sources of money are still the founder's own money, their own savings, and then their direct personal network. That stuff tends to precede even the crowdfunding options, certainly the ICO and the rest of it. And that's one reason why it tends to be tied to identity in certain networks, where some people are much more able to access their own savings and their friends and family. So at Venture for America, you know, we try and balance that by having various funding measures in place that are independent of one's identity, which is rare. You know, I mean, obviously.
Have a fund, right?
Yeah, we have a fund, and it's essentially guaranteed if you start a company out of VFA and you go through our accelerator, which has like an 80% acceptance rate. It's like the opposite of a normal accelerator, because in order to get into the VFA accelerator, you need to have gotten into Venture for America and then completed it. So we create like a much more supportive universe. I mean, capital is easier to come by at certain levels now than it has been because of things like crowdfunding. I've seen many successes out of it. Though I will say crowdfunding, like I've done crowdfunding competitions and raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it's a lot of work. Like it's not like you put it out and then like the internet masses descend and you get money like raining down on you. Like it's a ton of grinding it out and energy. So those things haven't really changed as much as one might hope or project.
Yeah, I think it depends on what the company is and who the entrepreneurs are. All money is not good money. And a lot of times I think entrepreneurs and naturally and understandably are so desperate for those resources that they pursue whatever avenue they can get to get that startup capital or that seed capital. But all money is not good money. And so I think it really depends on what your company is, making sure you're not only aligning yourself and thinking about the market, but also thinking about your resources and where you're acquiring those resources for. You may go to one investor where their portfolio looks such that they really need a huge exit. And you might be a first-time entrepreneur that's totally happy with a 10 million or a 12 million exit, and that investor is going to say, no, you can't sell at 10 million. You know, we need to continue scaling and growing and building until we hit 300 million or whatever that number they have in mind is. But there's a lot of risk between, as we all know, there's a lot of risk between 10 million and 300 million, and lots of companies die in that gap. And so knowing who you are, knowing what your goals are, knowing what your company is built to achieve is really important when you're seeking out that money. And so you might be able to get money from a crowdfunding campaign, or you might be able to get money from angels or VC, but it really depends on knowing your company and knowing yourself and what you're looking for.
Hi, it's Z again. My question is about how can you guys and entrepreneurs in general to tap into the talents of corporate America so in corporate America, there are a lot of young professionals who have entrepreneurial dream deep down in their heart, but a lot of times they don't have that next step, don't have that gut to actually take that next step. So how can entrepreneurs or VCs tap into talents of corporate America? Thanks.
So I talked to Z before, and he's got a side hustle and then a day job. So it sounds like that's what the question's about. I'm going to be so I was a corporate attorney for 5 months, hated it obviously, and then I had to make a decision whether to stay and try and start a company or not. And I got to say, man, you cut the cord on that paycheck, and there's nothing that's going to motivate you more. So it's not like how can the startups tap into corporate talent. It's like how can more corporate people cut that cord and then be like the cartoon character who runs off the cliff, who's just got their legs pumping and they don't know you know what I mean? That's the vision. And then the great thing is, and I can say this having had one company fail, another company not achieve its goals, it doesn't kill you. You know, no one, I had a net worth of negative 100,000 in my 20s, lost investors hundreds of thousands of dollars, and no one cared except for me, it turned out. I joke that no one knows you have a net worth of negative 100,000 unless you're stupid enough to tell them, which you never do. So, it's not how can startups access corporate talent. It's how can more people realize how free they are to do what's inside of them.
Yeah,
go ahead. Sorry.
So I grew up in that corporate environment with large consulting, top 5 consulting firms, and I think there are people who are big company people and small company people as well. The earlier you can sort of recognize that, I think that helps. But I know a lot of very smart, talented people in corporate America that couldn't really survive if they didn't have sort of those walls around them. And that was a hard lesson for me. When I came out of, I was at IBM at the time and came over to Veeva. IBM was a great company. I remember talking to Peter, our CEO, and he said, Dan, you're going to have to sort of relearn a lot of things and rethink a lot of things. And it took me, so I guess there's 2 points of advice here. If you're further along in corporate America, how do you make that transition? You need to sort of take a deep breath and realize that you need to relearn some things and be open to that education. I was a management consultant. I thought I knew everything, and I was wrong. And I learned a lot, and now I know more. I still don't know everything. And I think For people who are younger, I think that the sooner they can learn to network as well, we referred to networks earlier, I think that will give those individuals confidence, and I think it also will help calibrate their capabilities and sort of their level of risk tolerance, if you will. So that networking piece is a huge piece. And unfortunately, those networks of sort of entrepreneurs and sort of younger innovators, they won't find them necessarily in the big companies. So you got to work for that and find those networks.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of different ways that I think about that question, actually. I mean, the first, I'm always reminded of when I started my first company, and people would say, like, how did you know it was the right time? How did you know that you were going to take that leap and do that? And I remember thinking, it wasn't a question of deciding whether or not I was going to do it or not. It was a question of, I couldn't not do it. There was something that was so inspiring me to do it that the other there was things that people were trying to keep me from doing it, but I had to do it, right? And so when you have that feeling from an individual perspective, then I feel like that's where we can get some of that talent. The people who feel like they so have to do it that nothing can kind of hold them back. But the second piece of that is also what I tell a lot of my students, that it's okay to also wait. Right, just not wait too long, because we all have responsibilities. There are people in large corporations who have these responsibilities. And I also remember at the same time, when I was thinking of going into academia, I had all of these student loans to pay off, both from my undergraduate program as well as my MBA. And when I was in my MBA program, I remember asking people, what's the quickest way to pay off student loans? And everyone was like, oh, well, you go into iBanking. And I said, okay. And I remember turning to a friend and saying, like, wow, this internet banking thing is really big these days. This was a long time ago, but quickly realized it was investment banking. Went into investment banking for 2 years, and then on my 2-year anniversary, turned in my resignation letter and started a PhD program. And so sometimes you have these responsibilities where you need to take those 2 years to pay off student loans, or to develop those networks, or to develop those skill sets, and that's completely okay. It doesn't have to always be that I have to start this company and I'm going to just leap in and do it. There's a lot of value that comes from waiting and just making sure that you're not waiting too long, but taking that time to find that right time. As long as you do give yourself, I'm going to give myself 2 years, and recognize that after those 2 years, it's very easy to get caught up in the next bonus or something that's vesting or whatever's coming down the line. And so putting those controls in place for yourself as well. So,
as an example, for your first company, what was the impetus where you were like, I am going to do this tomorrow and quit my job and quit the program?
Yeah, I wish I could say that it was one particular thing that, I was like, this is a great market, or this is a great...
First step?
Yeah, I think it was more just I had thought about it so much, and I had thought about it a lot. It wasn't like I came up with the idea and then the next day I was like, I'm leaving and I'm going to do this. It was a lot of thought that went into it. I still had my day job. I was doing all these other things, but it was like I would come home and I would think about it, and I would come home and I would work on it, and I was always kind of ruminating and percolating on this, talking to lots of people, and half the people would say, you're crazy, you can't do this, you can't give up this job, mostly my mom, and then the other half of the people who were like, give this a shot, all this sorts of things, and so it was really, it was really just kind of it was a long, drawn-out thing where at some point I said, I have to do this. I cannot wait. I cannot not do this.
The single biggest catalyst of doing something is to tell everyone you're going to do it.
And then,
Because then you just don't have a choice. Then you have to do it.
And do you guys, for Venture for America, when students graduate college, do you encourage them to get a job first?
Yeah, they graduate from college, they get trained by us, and then they go work at a startup for 2 years, in part because we think that operating experience is super important. I think corporate training is super important. But to Laura's point also, it's like, at some point when you want to do it, and then again, we also have an accelerator and fund.
Right.
I mean, like the stuff, it's one of the things I've learned over the last number of years is that like entrepreneurship is somewhat, it's a deeply personal thing. Of course, and sometimes you just care about it so much that you will take that leap. And that it becomes much easier if there are people around you who make it seem normal-ish or sane. So That's like so if you take a 23-year-old and say, hey, you're moving to Philadelphia in a group of 15 people, then that becomes perfectly normal. It's like, hey, you're going to start companies, and this group, like cohort of like 12 people is also perfectly normal. You sort of normalize things. Try and normalize the abnormal, if you will.